All right. This is Moshe Lamman coming to you from Clarksburg, Maryland, candidate for U.S. Congress with the Green Party. And we're talking today about the situation with the U.S. and Venezuela, what Trump did going in, and what are the ramifications of that for the future. So at 2:01 a.m. on Saturday, January 3rd, the shadow fleet of tankers off the coast of Venezuela was suddenly illuminated by flares of over 150 U.S. aircraft. In Caracas, the silence was shattered by precision strikes on air defenses and communications hubs. Within 90 minutes, the man who had ruled Venezuela for over 13 years, Nicolás Maduro, was being escorted in handcuffs into the USS Iwo Jima fighter Navy ship. Today, Maduro is sitting in a federal cell in Manhattan, but while the mission Operation Absolute Resolve was a tactical masterpiece, well, I'm not sure that's correct. There was over 30 Cubans who died, and we're already finding out many Venezuelans. The aftermath is a geopolitical storm. From a constitutional crisis in Washington to a controversial new leadership in Caracas, we are entering the most uncertain chapter in Latin American history. Why now? To understand the invasion, you have to understand the indictment. The U.S. Department of Justice isn't just treating Maduro as a fallen dictator, they are treating him as a drug lord. The $15 million bounty, which ended up turning into $50 million, was a start. Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, face charges of narco-terrorism as a cocaine importation conspiracy. So these Venezuelans were probably getting it from Colombia. There were cocaine groups there and gangs, criminal organizations. They're saying Maduro was involved, and there's a lot more coming. The U.S. alleges that they led the cartel of the Suns, turning the Venezuelan military into a massive drug distribution hub. For the Venezuelan people, the crimes were much more intimate. The UN and the International Criminal Court have spent years documenting extrajudicial killings of over 100 people in 2024 after the election protests alone. Inside the helicoid and other prisons, reports of sexual abuse and electric shock torture were systematic. The U.S. justified this raid not as a war, but as a law enforcement extraction to end a decade of human rights atrocities. Now, the question is, does the U.S. have a right to do such a thing? There's a lot of questions here. You have unilateral action, you don't have United Nations, you don't have an international community that we can really go to for making these decisions. And you don't have Congress involved. When the Congress has the authority to declare war, not really the president, but we have a lot of exceptions to that. All right, then there's the oil. Venezuela has the world's largest proven reserves. President Trump has been blunt. The U.S. is going to run the sector to pay for the rebuild. That's already questionable. You have one country trying to run another, and we're going to use their oil to pay to rebuild their country, which is maybe what they want to do anyway. Of course, it's a heavier oil, 300 to 3 billion barrels there. You can't just get it out tomorrow. It could take 50 years to get all that oil out. And that oil is heavy, so it's thicker, and the problem is that's very bad for the environment. Fossil fuels, that's more carbon. Now we have more greenhouse gases, problems with ice melting, all the Green Party stuff. If you want to get into that, look at my website, moshelama.us, running now for U.S. Congress in the Maryland 6th District. You also have ocean acidification. You have weather patterns. Of course, we've seen that recently. Fires. We've got extreme storms. All that comes from fossil fuels. So is this a good idea? Why we may not want to do anything with this fossil fuel? The only thing they should be focused on in Venezuela is renewable energy, creating works of art, actual services for humans, health, clothing, manufacturing of proper things. Secretary of State Rubio and Energy Secretary Chris Wright have already begun a quarantine of Venezuelan crude. Plan is to have U.S. energy giants move in. Just wonderful. These folks just know how to make profit and get on. And essentially, their bottom line is what they're concerned about. Fix the crumbling infrastructure and flood the market to push global prices towards $50 a barrel. Think about that. $50 a barrel. We're all worried about oil. The problem is the U.S. went from the gold standard to the dollar, the so-called fiat currencies, and as we know, gold is now 4,500. Look at oil, $50 a barrel. It's worthless. You'd rather have water. Water is more valuable than oil. clean water, that is. So oil is not very valuable because people know that it's a dying energy source. It's bad for the environment. We don't need it. We need to leave it in the ground. Has some minor use. Plastics are terrible. Gas is terrible. Fuel for it's all at this point that it's had its time. We need to just leave it in the ground, I think. Trump calls this peace through strength, but critics call it a resource grab. Trump's stated goal is a safe, proper, and judicious transition, but he's already made it clear American companies will be the ones holding the wrenches. And so far, it looks like there is no transition. We're just the VPs taking over. And here's where the story takes a weird turn. You'd expect the U.S. to install the Democratic opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in popular support in the last election. She's the one people want, but instead, the U.S. has allowed Delcy Rodríguez, Maduro's own VP, to be sworn in as interim president. Trump has suggested Machado lacks the military support to hold the country together. This has created a bizarre dynamic. Rodriguez is publicly calling Maduro's arrest a kidnapping while privately coordinating with U.S. on oil production. What about Juan Guaido? He's essentially a ghost in this conversation, remaining in exile in Florida. The Guaido era is over. Washington has decided to work with the pliant technocrats of the old regime rather than risk a total power vacuum with the opposition. I think part of it is the U.S. current regime does not want a boots on the ground. They don't want to have to deal with all the micromanaging and running Venezuela, possible U.S. military deaths. And so they're trying it this way. Now, is any of this legal? That depends on who you ask. In international law, most experts say this is a flagrant violation of the UN Charter. Article 2, Section 4 prohibits the use of force against a sovereign state. There is no UN mandate here. There is no immediate attack on the U.S. The UN Secretary General called it a dangerous precedent. The U.S. Constitution in Washington, a war is brewing between the branches of the government. Trump claims inherent constitutional authority as commander-in-chief, but Congress is pushing back. On January the 8th, Senate moved towards a war powers resolution to rein him in. So does he have power to do this? This has to do with constitutional law. If you go back in time, there was less power for the president and more, but that has increased over time to do smaller military actions. The courtroom. Maduro pleaded not guilty in Manhattan on January the 5th. His lawyers will likely argue the U.S. had no right to kidnap a sitting president, but the U.S. relies on the care frisbee doctrine, which says if you're in the courtroom, the court doesn't care how you got there. Now, Operation Absolute Resolve removed the dictator in a night, but it may have created a decade of legal and political headaches as Caracas sits under a state of emergency and 32 Cuban military personnel are confirmed dead from the strikes. The world is watching to see if this is truly a liberation or just a change in management. Maduro's trial is the headline, but the real story is what happens to the 28 million people left behind in a country that is now effectively an American protectorate. Now remember, almost 8 million people left Venezuela because of all his, they hated, Maduro, also his economic policy inflated their currency, became very, very nearly worthless at some time. And it was hard to make money. Oil did go down, the output, and so he ran the economy to the ground, supposedly being socialist after Hugo Chavez. But in the end, it was really a bad situation. So I know someone, I worked in an immigration case for a young lady who walked here from Venezuela through these forests, these rainforests in Colombia, very dangerous. She got all bit up, then she walked buses through all the way up through Panama, Mexico, etc., and got in here. And there was the TPS program for Venezuelan refugees, so they could stay, potentially pathway to citizenship eventually, but he's ended that. And so we have all of these Venezuelans, they're 8 million, they're in the US, they're in Mexico, they're all over the place, Spain, and well, hopefully they can go back at some point, but it's really a mess now overall. And I think that while it may have been a good thing to get rid of Maduro, the U.S. now has a lot of work to do, and they need to be careful to do it properly. So that's an overview of what's going on, and we'll continue the conversation as things arise. And again, this is Moshe Lemon, political candidate with the Green Party, wishing you a great day.